This morning's gospel reading comes from Luke chapter 17, verses 5 through 10. The apostles said to the Lord, "Increase our faith." He replied, "If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you could say to this mulberry tree, 'Be uprooted and planted in the sea,' and it will obey you. Suppose one of you has a servant plowing or looking after the sheep. Will he say to the servant when he comes in from the field, 'Come along now and sit down to eat'? Won't he rather say, 'Prepare my supper, get yourself ready and wait on me while I eat and drink. After that, you may eat and drink'? Will he thank the servant because he did what he was told to do? So you also, when you have done everything you were told to do, should say, 'We are unworthy servants. We have only done our duty.'"
This summer, I went up on a hike, and Mary and I spent 4 days in the Adirondacks, and we climbed some of the high peaks up there. And the first one we did was Mount Colden, and we went up the steep side of Mount Colden, and there's a series of basically ladders. They're sort of like stairs, but they're more like ladders. They go up a very particularly steep place. And I remember thinking, and I'm afraid of heights, and I remember thinking, I sure would enjoy this if this was just a little easier and if this was just a little less steep. And I think we all encounter things like that where we think, I sure would enjoy this if this was just a little bit easier. I'm struck by the opening line of our gospel reading from Luke this morning, where the disciples say to Jesus, "Increase our faith." It's kind of random. If you read the whole chapter, it's a very random thing that they do. To me, what does that sound like? What does that sound like to you? Increase our faith. To me, it sounds like a plea to Jesus, just to make things a little easier. Gee, Jesus, I sure would like this better if it was a little bit easier. But as I've talked about, faith isn't easy, is it? And I'm sure that you all encountered times where faith isn't easy. It's especially not easy the way we do it in the United Methodist Church. We leave a lot of room for questions and for conversations. It would be a whole lot easier if I just told you what to believe and you believed it. It would be a whole lot easier if I just told you to read the Bible and to take everything that you read there at face value. But I don't do that, because I don't think that really brings us closer to the truth. And if we're not getting closer to the truth, then we're really not getting any closer to God. You may or may not know this about me, but I attended a small private Christian college. And it's on the conservative end of things, you could say. Sometimes I wish I really would have gone somewhere else for undergrad, especially since so much of seminary, at least the first time through, felt like a repeat of college. But the one thing I came away with from my small private Christian college more than anything else is that the truth is the most important thing. The truth not in spite of faith, but because of faith. That a rigorous pursuit of the truth won't lead us further away from God, but it'll actually lead us toward God, since God is the author of all truth. So here's why, in spite of all our struggles right now, that I choose to be United Methodist. And in spite of all our controversies, which, tend to turn out to be mostly just wastes of precious resources, I'm proud to be United Methodist, because I believe that we care about the truth, that we don't just say things are settled the way they are, that we're not afraid of where the truth leads us, because ultimately we believe that the truth leads us to God. Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." That's John 14:6. "And no one finds God except through me." We are in pursuit of the truth. So we've been trudging through some really difficult material this fall. The Gospel of Luke, especially the kind of randomness of the way Luke puts these teachings together. If you read these same teachings in Matthew has a very organized way of presenting all these these teachings, and he does that on the Sermon on the Mount. If you read this section of Luke, though, it seems very kind of thrown together, like, oh, you know what? I remember Jesus teaching this. I should put that in here. I should put that in here. I should put that in here. And it kind of, it feels like a bunch of non sequiturs squished together. So it's not easy stuff. And Jeremiah, and now on to Lamentations, well, that's, did you hear the scripture this morning or look at the lectionary and think, are you kidding me? We've gone from Jeremiah into this, something even more dreary. It's not easy, is it? Not easy to look at these passages. So why do we do it? Why do we spend time here on Sunday morning during the sermon? Well, it's because we're interested in the truth. What truth is found here? Where does it lead us? What does it tell us about God? What does it tell us about ourselves? So often we're like the disciples. We're looking for an easy way, and then when things get difficult, we throw up our hands and say, increase our faith. Make it easier. But Jesus has a very different solution. And so his reply to the disciples isn't probably what they expected. He says in verse 6, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mulberry tree, be uprooted and planted in the sea, and it will obey you. Now, what is it in Matthew? Does anybody remember? What does Jesus say about the mustard seed in Matthew? If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can tell a what?
Mountain.
A mountain. Right. So in Luke, it's a mulberry tree. But same kind of thing. Something deeply rooted in the ground. And it will obey you. When I first read these words, my first reaction is, well, it's not really particularly helpful. What is Jesus doing? Well, what Jesus is saying is it's not really about your faith at all. It's about what bubbles to the top when you're confronted with a real challenge or a difficulty, when your life becomes chaotic. What is it that is most important? The book of Lamentations is all about what rises to the top for the people of Jerusalem, who have experienced the destruction of their city, their temple, their religion, and their way of life. All of this was previously unthinkable to them. They thought, despite of all their unfaithfulness and everything else, that no matter what, God would protect them, or even if he wouldn't protect them, at least God would protect the temple and their city. But the unthinkable happened, and Jerusalem had been destroyed, and the people were carried off into exile. They were the people that Jeremiah and the other prophets accused of being faithless and wicked. But we see in Ecclesiastes a dramatic turnaround here, don't we? Because Ecclesiastes, or Lamentations, is an incredible prayer of faith in the midst of despair and chaos. It's like they suddenly discover their faith just when they need it most. And along with that, a real sense of, boy, I wish we would have realized this a little earlier. Just hear this little snippet from our passage in Lamentations chapter 1, verses 5 and 6. They write, her foes have become her masters, her enemies are at ease. The Lord has brought her grief because of her many sins. Her children have gone into exile, captive before the foe. All the splendor has departed from daughter Zion. Her princes are like the deer that find no pasture. In weakness they have fled before the pursuer. One of the things I really appreciate about the Old Testament is its ability to remember both victory and defeat equally. Sins are recalled as readily as great moments of faith. This isn't a book or a collection of books that only records Israel's wins, though there are those moments too in the Old Testament. But there are these incredible moments of defeat, of misery, and of pain for all of us to read and to see and to wonder at. The truth is that we all face that stuff, don't we? The Old Testament really covers all of life. We all have moments of defeat. We all have moments of misery, moments of pain, moments of suffering. And I'm thankful that the Bible has something to say about those things, because I know that God is still there in those moments. Just think, if the Bible had nothing to say in those moments, where would we find God? Jesus says to his disciples, you have enough faith already. You don't need any more faith. The problem is not faith. Jesus puts it another way in Luke 17, 7 through 10. He says, suppose one of you has a servant plowing and looking after the sheep. Will he say to the servant when he comes to the field, come along now and sit down to eat? Or would he rather say, prepare my supper, get yourself ready and wait on me while I eat and drink, and after that you may eat and drink? Will he thank the servant because of what he was told to do? So you also, when you have done everything you were told to do, you should say, we are unworthy servants. We've only done our duty. Kind of harsh, right? All the disciples asked was, hey, Jesus, increase our faith. And he says, no. So what's the problem here? What is Jesus getting at? I think the problem is that we expect it to be different than it is. And the Old Testament shows us that it is not going to be different than it is. The disciples expected to go from victory to victory with Jesus. They expected it to be like stand up for Jesus, right? From victory to victory we go on until we reach eternity. But they found that life with Jesus was actually making their lives more difficult. What was the reward for that? And where was it? Jesus says to them, no, it's you've got it all wrong here. The reward is to know God. The reward is to find your life fulfilled in serving God's purposes. There's nothing else to earn here. It's like I said last week. God isn't going to love you more than God already does. And God isn't going to love you less than God already does. Because God's love is a constant. It doesn't get any smaller or greater than it already is. In fact, it's not quantifiable at all. It just simply is. There's no special reward for being more faithful or less faithful. You know, I was learning something recently, and it was so different from anything I've learned. I said to the instructor, you know, is there a way that I could just maybe make flashcards or something just to make this a little easier for me to learn and pick up? And she said to me, no, you've just got to do this. There's nothing to memorize here. There's no cheat code, you know? You just got to keep doing it day after day after day after day. The usual methods are not going to serve you. And the usual methods are not going to serve you in faith either. There's no special reward for being more or less faithful. Because the reward is the faith itself. And all of you have some. And the reward is the ability and the privilege to find a life rich in meaning, serving God. God is the only one who can fulfill our lives. If we're constantly turning around in our journey with God, expecting to find accolades or affirmations, well, we're not going to get very far. First of all, we're facing in the wrong direction every time we turn around. We've got to keep forward because that's where God is leading us. Sometimes the accolades and the affirmations are few and far between, like they were for the disciples. Being faithful can sometimes be thankless, especially if we're doing this for any other reason except to love and to serve God. Well, I say that this morning because we're celebrating World Communion Sunday. It's a Sunday that we remember that Christians all over the world are gathered together in their churches, in their homes, and in their communities, celebrating communion. In open or in secret, everyone, everywhere, wherever they find themselves, is gathering as a statement of their faith in God through Jesus Christ. And I'm reminded that regardless of their circumstances, you know, we often equate blessing with God being with us. We often equate blessing with material things, with ease, with comfort. But God is equally with the people who are out there suffering. God is equally with the people who are persecuted for their faith, as God is with us this morning. And so whether those of us are worshiping in prosperity and freedom, or in secret or in poverty, or all the people somewhere in between. God is with all of us. God loves all of us the same. Our passages today are reminders of what's really important. God is important. Our faith is important. We don't need anything at all, actually, to know and to practice those things. So in the midst of crisis, what's important to you? What comes to the surface? What emerges in the midst of chaos? It's in those moments that you find out what your values are, what your faith is made out of. And it's in those moments that the people that wrote Lamentations, who had been accused of being faithless, who had accused of being wicked, found their faith. So sometimes God gives us the ability to find things that we didn't know we had in the midst of crisis, in the midst of hardship, in the midst of chaos. When you find that you have faith, it doesn't matter how much you have, it's enough. It's enough to know that Jesus is going to get you to the other side. It's enough to get you to know that Jesus will never abandon you or forsake you or stop loving you. It's enough to know that you can keep going. So keep going this morning.